The horror genre is alive and well in 2026, with two of the highest grossing films of the year being Obsession and Backrooms, made by young filmmakers in their 20s. Interestingly, I think both films are more similar than you'd expect at first glance, showing a lot of what 2020's filmmaking has been trying to say, though they also have amazingly unique qualities that make both of them very special and unique in their own ways. Today I'm going to talk about those two films, my interpretations of them, and why I think both films are like that. Both films have this undercurrent uneasiness that permeates throughout far more than actually scary horror moments, like with actual jump scares. Obsession especially has some of what you'd call traditional jump scares, but the horror mostly comes from the vibe being slightly off. This sort of unsettling, uncanny storytelling comes from keeping a lot of the answers away from the audience. In the 2010s, a lot of horror would over explain the devices or places that are the source of the plot. Like the Conjuring franchise, which was entirely built on haunted objects and exploring their origins so the characters could come up with a way to beat them. Or even Jordan Peele's Us, over explaining the tunnels and how the tethered came to be. The 2000s were largely characterized by torture porn and external threats like aliens as a reaction to 9/11. Those threats were very tangible and easy to understand. In the 2020s, however, horror seems way more conceptual than physical or objective, which I think harkens back to some of the greatest horror stories of all time, like The Shining, in which the horror doesn't come from the ghosts in the Overlook Hotel, but from the slow corrosion over time of Jack's state of mind as a way to symbolize succumbing to alcoholism, and also the ghosts in the Overlook Hotel. Funnily enough, The Shining is also an example of liminal horror that Backrooms is very reminiscent of. Kane Parsons said he has 70 pages of lore written down, but that he doesn't like drowning people in lore and mythology because it's an irresponsible creative choice. This reminds me of the line from Tenet,
Don't try to understand it. Feel it.
where a lot of people saw it as a meta line about the mechanics of the inversions, which I somewhat agree with, but it's not a line that's dismissive of the mechanics of the film, much like how Kane Parsons clearly has thought about the lore behind the Backrooms. It's more so that you have to trust the filmmaker knows what they're doing, and that it makes sense. And with that trust, you let them guide you through a story where you internalize the narrative and themes without focusing on the minute details because it will distract from the intended experience. Even though Obsession is a Blumhouse film, the way you'd expect the story to go if it was the usual 2010s Blumhouse schlock is that Bear would try to learn more about the One Wish Willow and its origins, and the film would end with him trying to burn down the original tree that grants the wishes. The film would end with the tree sprouting again as its final shot. I'm not entirely knocking this idea. I know that filmmakers could very easily tell a poignant and thematically rich story within that formulaic idea. In the 2020s, though, the threats are more existential and opaque. Noah Hawley, creator of Alien Earth, Legion, and Fargo, once said, I refer to Lynch's work a lot in Legion's uncanniness. The concept of the uncanny basically boils down to what scares us most is not what you can't see, but when familiar things act in unfamiliar ways. The whole deal with Backrooms is that it's a bunch of regular rooms, just everything about them is slightly off. It feels eerie even if there is no visible threat. The whole idea of the still lives, or the objects in the backrooms, is that they're a simulacrum of real people and objects, but like with AI generated content, which is a theme explored in both films that I'll get into later, there's something wrong and off about them. We have these ideas in our minds of what things should look and feel like, so when we see them replicated in a way that so clearly and blatantly goes against those ideas, it feels unnerving. How could someone misunderstand humans so much as to create still lives? And what's more interesting is they're not made by anyone. It isn't someone that misunderstood humans. It was just the corrosion of humanity over time by being put in a place that erases itself as it forgets its own identity. The horror is existential and intangible. It's the idea of losing yourself and your identity over time, obviously analogous to dementia. It's also the idea that something, maybe God or a machine like AI, can misunderstand humanity so deeply that it distorts reality to whatever still lives are. This thread, I think, runs through both films. The horror and obsession comes from Nikki acting off, but in a very recognizable way abusive and obsessive partners act like, just exaggerated to the extreme. But especially how the film shows you she's the biggest victim of her own acts. The existential dread for her to live inside her own body with no chance of escape, with having to see herself become a shadow of her former self, being erased as this thing takes control of her body. Just like Captain Clark, the still life in the Backrooms becomes this version of himself, only focused on one goal, consuming, because he believes he is owed the world just for existing. Nikki becomes this version of herself with only one goal, loving Bear. Both films also follow the idea of clinging onto memories of things, even after they're long gone. Mary in Backrooms lets go of her past, of her attachment to her childhood home and her memories of her mom, when she uses the handprint cement block to hit Captain Clark. But Clark clings on to the memory of his fight with his wife, constantly wanting to recreate it to prove he's a good person, a good husband, even when it's clear he's not.
And now, as an adult, you're still stuck right where you started.
Similarly, Bear wants Nikki to act like the Nikki he knows, the person he fell in love with, even after he's changed her to become something she's not, clinging to the memory of the Nikki he erased, putting the blame onto her instead of himself for Nikki acting different to what he wants.
I can't be Nikki!
Just be Nikki!
I can't.
So instead of a malevolent force in either film, the villains are the protagonists. Characters who want everything handed to them, but also don't want things to change. Characters who fell in love with women because of who they are, of their independence and agency. Who decide those things should be taken away when they might clash with what they want out of life, shaping them into shells of who they are for men's benefit.
People do, don't they? Mix up love and possession. Yeah, they do. I don't think that should be possible. I mean, they're opposites, really. Love and ownership.
The Backrooms itself isn't evil, neither is the One Wish Willow, they're just things. The One Wish Willow is used to make an evil wish, and the Backrooms is used by Clark to avoid change, but neither have anything inherently bad about them. In some way, both end up being stuck in situations that are both everything they wanted and their worst nightmares. Bear gets to be with the love of his life, but in a way that hurts and terrifies him, losing the Nikki he loved. Clark gets to live a life without changing, without learning from his mistakes, but also becoming this version of himself he always feared, the furniture salesman who belongs to nowhere, the parody of himself that Captain Clark is. The 1990s also explored this idea of seeing through the broken fabric of the system, which I think explains why Backrooms is set in 1990. With films like The Matrix, Fight Club, and Dark City in the late 90s, but the difference is that those films had people controlling the system in a way that could be taken down and solved by one strong person fighting it, instead of the idea in the 2020s that the system is unchangeable because we're all powerless to change it. So it perpetuates as a reflection of our choices, but with no malice behind it, as most of us are just victims of the system or following along it unquestioning. Both films have a lot to say about men, as two films where the male characters would rather live in this twisted version of reality than admit they're flawed, and neither learn anything from the experience.
You don't have to worry. She says we don't need to change.
They die thinking all the hurt they've caused is not their fault, and condemning women to deal with the consequences of their fragile egos' inability to accept change. As a reflection of Gen Z anxieties in the 2020s, I think these films show the idea that comes from our sense of irreality. The whole world feels fake. The American dream that our parents talk about was a lie, which is reflected especially by Backrooms with Clark's furniture store failing. Our connections feel fake. Everyone's sense of entitlement leads them to believe they can do no wrong and they deserve love and adoration without earning it. Everything is an imitation of something real, something promised to us as we grew up that has turned out to be a lie, something just out of reach that past generations all had. With that, both films use the idea of AI to showcase that. Backrooms being especially reminiscent of early AI-generated images with the still lifes, and the objects inside the backrooms being weird copies of real things, which was obviously intended to be about memories fading over time and changing their form in our minds, but also about it being a place that tries to recreate reality but can't get it right.
Imagine describing a dog to someone who's never seen one before and then asking them to draw it.
Obsession sees Bear using a large language model to search about the One Wish Willow, to show his mind is being abandoned, so he learns to believe he is entitled to good things with no effort.
Be a food critic or something.
You put ketchup on your steak.
I'll come in and they'll be like, hey, aren't you the food guy? And I'll say, please, call me 3 by Bailey. And then they will serve me a 4-course meal, and I'll pull out my wallet, and they'll say, no, sir, please, tonight, on the house. And then I get paid.
Is that how that goes?
Also using AI-generated images to show his love to Nikki, because just as their relationship itself is an imitation of a real relationship, so is his way of showing affection and connecting with her, because he doesn't care to put in the effort to love her. When he's confronted directly by Nikki before he makes the wish, he chickens out and doesn't tell her he likes her.
Do you like me?
What?
Because if you do, now's the time to tell me.
I think we're good friends.
Because that would require effort, the energy of putting yourself out there and potentially being rejected, and Bear wants everything handed to him with no effort.
I mean, it's just a job, Nikki.
Yeah, well, I want to write.
Both Nikki and Mary want to change their lives, follow new paths to achieve their dreams.
No, I feel like I need a big life change. I'm not feeling love.
While the men are stuck waiting for good things to happen to them without working for them.
They're an improvement on the originals. For starters, they can't feel anything.
As a way of talking about entitlement and the place men have in society compared to women, I think both films explore these ideas really well, while obviously putting their unique spins on them. I think Obsession probably explores its themes more thoroughly and interestingly, but I also think Backrooms is a fantastic film that goes for some really cool horror sequences, as well as its exploration of themes and Clark's state of mind. It's very cool how successful both films were, and I'm excited to see more from young horror filmmakers in the near future, and what they have to explore and say about our world. If these films are any indication for where horror might be heading, we're in very good hands. If you enjoyed this video, I recommend watching the Morbid Zoo's analysis of both films too, that she approaches from a more Marxist approach, which is partly what inspired me to make my own video. And yes, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe, hype this video if you want to. It helps me a lot. And it's free, so do that. If you want to support the channel financially, you can leave a super thanks or Ko-Fi and Patreon in the description, or becoming a channel member. And yeah, thanks for watching, folks. Bye-bye.